All right, welcome to the All Access Entertainment Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Joseph Bruen, and this week we have the quintessential stud muffin, Mr. Joel Gertner. Joel, thanks for joining us this week.
Yeah, man, thank you for having me.
Appreciate you taking the time. We're going to have some fun, kind of deep diving into your career a little bit and talking all things pro wrestling. Why don't we start off with, growing up as a fan, when did you first discover pro wrestling?
It's tricky because it was around the time that pro wrestling exploded and that the WWF here in the Northeast was expanding nationally rather than just being a regional operation. So it was around that time when a lot of people were getting into it, when the marketing was getting really big, when the merchandising was getting really big. What makes it tricky for me is even before I was a tape trader, selling and trading tapes, maybe at the end of the 80s and in the early 90s. Coliseum Video from 84 or 85 on allowed me to kind of be a historian and keep up with wrestling, not just watching it on TV episodically week after week, but I was also able to watch big shows. I was able to watch compilations, and a lot of them included stuff from the archives that went back into the 70s, even the 60s. So I was so engrossed in wrestling culture at this time in the early mid 80s that I was watching it going forward week to week and going backward watching older stuff all at the same time. And I was so young in doing that that I never really kind of made an effort to make a milestone or a landmark out of when I started watching. So I'll go back to like historyofwwf.com or historyofwwe.com, Graham Coughlin's page, and I'll try my best looking at results and stuff to try to figure out when I started watching, but it's really, really hard to pinpoint. I think I've got it narrowed down. I think I started in the summer because a buddy of mine that I went to school with, before I went to school with him, I went to summer day camp with him. He's the one that got me into wrestling. So I think I would have started watching right after July 4th of either 83 or 84, maybe even a chance that it was 85. And I was watching so much going backwards a year or two that I think I was watching in 83 or 84, but I actually wasn't. So as early as 83, as early as 85, maybe summer of 84, somewhere around there. So a little over 40 years now. And yeah, just loved it. My bar mitzvah was in 88, and the theme of it was wrestling. Became a tape trader probably around 89, 90 for sure. And then got in the business as talent around 91 or so. So yeah, probably been into it now, at least as a fan, as a spectator, as a historian for just over 40 years.
Awesome. And when it came to tape trading, obviously that's a lost art now. There are no tapes anymore. Everything's digital. But when it came to tape trading, what were some of the harder ones to get? Was it easier to get WWF or WCW? Or did it not really matter either way?
I think it didn't really matter either way. There were some people that specialized in Japan. There was one guy, Jeff Lynch, that really his collection was a Japanese collection, and he had maybe a few more promotions than other people who kind of were worldwide might. I don't think it so much mattered. Um, yeah, I think it was pretty easy. Yeah, I mean, you had to kind of be involved enough in the scene to crack the code and find out where to go to find out who these tape traders were. So it wouldn't hurt to be a newsletter subscriber, either of the server or the chatterbox, something like that. So you might not just from reading newsstand magazines know who the tape traders were. I think, at a certain point, RF Video I think did start advertising maybe in more mainstream magazines, but in the late 80s, very early 90s, not so much. He was still young. maybe just starting out. So to in the late '80s, to know where to go, you had to know where to go. But once you did, um, getting anything was just a matter of getting the catalog, picking what you wanted, sending the money, and getting the tape.
And what would those tapes usually run?
Um, 15 or 20 bucks of then money, right? 15 or 20 bucks. I think 15 or 20 bucks in 1990, a little bit different than it is now.
Sure.
Probably, yeah, right. More like 30 or $35 now. But yeah, that usually would cover it. And the tape traders had deals where the more you buy, the cheaper it is per unit.
And you had been, as a fan, to some epic meet and greets early on. Why don't you kind of go back and tell us some of the early conventions that you attended as a fan?
Two that I remember most, the biggest ones maybe, or that made an impact on me, were both maybe the first two that I went to. I'm not sure, but they were both in 1991. And there was the UWF Fan Expo. That's the Herb Abrams UWF, not the Bill Watts UWF. There was the UWF Fan Expo, I want to say in January of '91. And then there was the Weekend of Champions 2, uh, also a John Arezzi convention. That was in August of '91. That was, I think, SummerSlam weekend of '91. Um, yeah, they were both fun. They were both great. Got to meet different people for the first time at either one. Got to meet Mick Foley for the first time at the January one. Got to meet Ric Flair for the first time at the August one. Got a picture with a very realistic, almost sort of like a duplicate, maybe even made by Reggie Parks himself, commissioned a WWF Intercontinental title. Um, yeah,
Nice.
conventions were really fun. A lot of people to meet, a lot of stuff that you could buy and sell. I was a videotape trader at the '91 one. I got at the August of '91 convention from Harry White in St. Louis. I got a bunch of NWA St. Louis or St. Louis Wrestling Club paychecks, wrestling checks that had been sent back to the office canceled. And then I guess like they were vacating the office or they were demolishing the building, running a wrecking ball through it or whatever. And somebody went into the drawers and they saved the checks. Um, so I've got like 3 dozen of those, a few flares, a Vince McMahon Sr., I think that turns 50 years old next year.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I think a Harley race too. I've got a couple of them from '76, and the cornerstone of my collection, and I'd say not just my wrestling collection, but maybe everything that I collect. The cornerstone of all my collectibles is an Andre the Giant paycheck that was written to him. Coincidentally enough, this wouldn't have mattered back at the time that I acquired the check, but come to find out now later, it was written to Andre for his match that he had the night before my wife was born. Didn't know her,
Wow.
but it was for a match against Crusher Blackwell in October of '82. And yeah, it's for 3 or 4 grand. Again, of then money, so more like 10 or 12 grand now, probably. Maybe upwards of 10 grand, 12 grand. And it is endorsed by Andre and it is signed on the back in Sharpie for deposit only, Andre Rusimov. So it's signed by Andre in his real name, not as Andre the Giant. Even though the check is made out, typewritten on the front to Andre the Giant, it is endorsed by Andre Rusimov. So that's the pride and joy of my collection. I got that at that convention. I got a Chicago version program of Muhammad Ali versus Antonio Inoki at that convention. So had a good eye, got a couple of nice scores, sold and traded some tapes, met a lot of wrestlers. It was, I mean, it was better than Disney World. I mean, it was just, just a blast. I mean, every moment was just, you feel like you're exactly, for somebody like me, I mean, for my interests at the time, I felt like I was exactly in the right place at the right time there.
Exactly, and at that point, you're already such a fan. You love the business. How did you first go about getting your foot into the door as far as getting into the business and becoming, an actual member of the business?
I think I was reading the Wrestling Chatterbox, which was a local. It wasn't. I mean, it went worldwide. And I don't. I mean, I don't want to call it local. It was. I guess I consider it local because Georgianne was in Queens and she was big on the New York scene as I was. So to me, there's a bit of a local flavor to it. But I guess that's not the right word to use. But there was a newsletter produced locally. By Georgianne Macropolis called the Wrestling Chatterbox, and it was news. It had a different slant than, let's say, The Observer. It was news, it was gossip, it was trivia, it was games, riddles, puzzles. So it was a lot of fan club type stuff because she ran Bruno's fan club in the 70s, Bruno Sammartino. Um, so I subscribed to her newsletter, became friendly with her, and came to find out that there were some schools in the area. For whatever reason, there was Johnny Rods' school at in Dumbo, under the Brooklyn Bridge at Gleason's gym. And I don't know why I made the decision and I gravitated towards the Lower East Side Wrestling Gym, which was kind of the other New York City area gym. It was on the lobby level, like the ground level of a housing project, the Baruch housing projects in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And I found my way there. So many did. The shows that they ran, the gym shows, the bootleg shows. Once a month, you would see Jason Knight there. You would see Devin Storm, who went on to be Crowbar, the Inferno Kid. Just a lot of guys. So yeah, I found out about it, and I showed up and I went. I did two, maybe even one lessons as a wrestler, and already knew that my bread wasn't buttered and that I didn't want to be a wrestler per se. But I figured it's a wrestling school, so it might be a little bit ridiculous to be like, "Hey, can you guys train me to be a referee?" Like, I'm sure some people do that, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. But
Sure.
I'm at a wrestling school, maybe take at least one lesson as a wrestler. It helps me, by the way, when I do color, to have even that one or two lessons worth of background, because to know how much it hurts initially before you've toughened up your body and gotten used to it, to know how much it hurts to take the ropes, to know how awkward it is to fall and take a bump, to know needing to tuck your chin. Just the little fundamental things that I learned in the first one or two lessons are things that actually do help me when I'm calling a match. Um, so I'm glad I did that, but I'm also glad that I knew going in from jump that that wasn't where my bread was buttered in this industry. And while I was there, I refereed a few times, but I was mostly a manager. I was 16 or 17 years old, finishing up high school, and I was Joey Jaguar, a snot nosed punk, nothing sexual like the quintessential stud muffin, just more of kind of a Paul Heyman, a Jim Cornette. If attitude wise, maybe if he were a manager like a Tully Blanchard, just kind of like a snot nose, entitled. That was kind of the gist of Joey Jaguar, and I started doing that sometime around my 16th birthday. So yeah, I think next year I'll be 35 years in, I guess.
Wow, that's fantastic. So ECW comes about, obviously headed by Todd Gordon, and then transitioned into Paul Heyman over the years. At what point did you get involved with that company, and what was that wild experience like getting into ECW? Did you know what to expect?
No, no, and even when you were there, you didn't know what to expect. You never knew week to week. You never knew. We prided ourselves on expect the unexpected, and I think that was just as much true operationally, politically, just in real life. That's just the way it was. No, I didn't know. I had been enjoying it as a fan, as a tape trader, as a newsletter reader. I had been following ECW for 2 or 3 years at that point, which I guess would be since when it started. Um, I the story is really, it's simple, and when I tell it, a lot of people are like, it can't that can't be real, that it can't be that simple. But I went to a show in August of '95. I was hanging out at the hotel bar, networking, hanging out with friends. I think maybe watching the TV show for that week on a replay on the hotel bar TV and having a few drinks. And Paul Heyman walked into the hotel. He was in the lobby and he was about to go up in the elevator. And I approached him, introduced myself, let him know that we had a mutual friend, let him know that I admired his work, that I used to listen to him on John Arezzi's radio show, call in. Um, and I said, "You guys have a show coming up in Middletown, New York. I go to Cornell. It's not that far away." That's a lie. But I said, "Your ring announcer and timekeeper, I know they're based out of Philly. I don't know if they're making the trip for the Middletown show. So if you would otherwise be left in a lurch looking for somebody last minute anyway, I would be honored if I could kind of audition and work for you on that night." And he just kind of looked at me. Whatever I said, I guess, was kind of a combination to this mysterious lock that I was hoping that I could open. And I guess I cracked the code, and he was like, "You want it?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." He's like, "You got it. Be there by 5."
Wow. So
Was it
just like you said, that easy, right? Right in.
nothing's ever been easy. I mean, that's I think that's the biggest win of my life so far. Covers a little bit of ground, but maybe that I think that could be the biggest win of my life. The easiest thing I ever did. Had nothing to lose, right? I mean, the answer is no until you ask the question anyway. And yeah, I mean, just blessed. Always feel blessed that I was, even if it was a case of me just not knowing how dumb I was being and just being young and dumb and having nothing to lose. I'm so glad that it worked out.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. You got to take the chance sometime. You'll never know if you don't do it. So,
I've always, if you're gonna regret something in life, it's always better to regret what you do than regret what you don't do, and
right.
have to wonder and have to question and have to play the what if game. And then on the other end of things, where it involves risk, I've always been a believer that the price of risk is costly. It's expensive, even. But wait until life brings you the bill for not taking risk. I've always just kind of been of that mindset.
And when did you transition from doing stuff like that, timekeeper and that sort of thing, to prominent manager there?
So I was a timekeeper and a backup ring announcer. Did some straight up ring announcing. Was the ring announcer for November to Remember '95 because I guess Bob Ortiz maybe had other obligations that night. So ring announced that show. I think minus one match that Joey did for storyline purposes. Um, was the primary ring announcer for a while, maybe half a year or so. Maybe Bob Ortiz comes back around June of '96. I'm trying to remember. Um, and then also in that time, in late '95, the Luchadors are in. I've told Paul that I speak Spanish fluently, which at the time I did. Told him that I was well versed with being able to do a lucha style ring introduction exactly as you would see it on Galavision. So he allowed me to do the ring intros for Ray, Psychosis, Hoovy, Conan. Damien 666 comes in. I'm doing a trilingual ring introduction for him in English, Spanish, and Japanese. When Bob Ortiz comes back, I get moved sideways, which I always wanted to make sure that every time I was being moved sideways, it winds up being a move forward and onward and upward. So he comes back to be the primary ring announcer and resume his spot. So I go on to be a heel ring announcer. I go on to be the mouthpiece for the Dudleys, a few acts before the Dudleys, and then land with the Dudleys. Um, yeah, that happened, I guess, in '96, and then Barely Legal was April of '97. Took total elimination from the Eliminators, wound up in the neck brace. Stayed with the Dudleys, I think, until '99, until they left, and then got moved sideways again and became the color man for Joey and the co-host of the TNN show.
So Bob Artis, what are your memories of Bob, and what was he like backstage?
Bob's a prince. Bob's a great guy. Bob's like super. He's like a great wrestling ring announcer. He's like just exactly filled the role perfectly for a Philly ring announcer, for a hardcore promotion ring announcer, but also just a real person, down to earth, grounded, um, just a real good guy. Yeah.
And people joke obviously about the ECW paychecks and all that, but what's the pay structure of ECW as far as you being paid at that point per show, per gig, or are you being paid for chunks of time? How did that work there?
I was on a nightly until I think I signed my contract April 30th of '99. Which would be 3 months or 4 months before TNN starts airing. And I think it's around the time, I guess, that the Dudleys probably started to make it known that they might be in the process of leaving. So in April of '99, I signed a contract, and at that point, I was getting paid biweekly every 2 weeks, um, annually, and annually broken up bi-weekly. Um, was not an employee, was still an independent contractor, still a 1099 guy. So, God, I don't even know if I paid for health insurance, right? Because when you're that young, you don't even think, right? Like you think, and which
Sure.
is the way in ECW, it's crazy not to pay for health insurance. So if I didn't, that was not something that I'm advocating or saying was a bright idea, but because they weren't, but I don't remember doing it out of pocket. So I was making good money considering it was '99, considering I was 23 years old. I was making great money under contract. I was making decent money on a nightly right before the contract, but again, all things being equal, but the contract signing that helped, and I had like no expenses, no kids, gosh, rent. I moved to Waterbury, Connecticut because I found out PJ was living there, and we were hanging out at the time, and I was at his place, I think. And hey, if you don't mind answering, how much do you pay for rent? Because I was in Brooklyn at the time, Brooklyn, New York. And he told me, and I moved right away because I got a nice place for 510. I think it went up to like 525 or something. But like, yeah, yeah. So the pay structure, to answer your question, kind of sorry if
That's
I
right.
veered. The pay structure, yeah, case by case. I think it depended how long you'd been in the company, what the company's level of need for you was, what your utility was, how much of a veteran were you, what other companies had you been. There were probably 10 factors that contributed to who was on a nightly and who they offered a contract to.
So by 1999, you were there for a few years already at that point. You mentioned PJ. Who was some of your inner circle that you just felt comfortable with and you kind of, you were friends with over the years backstage?
Everybody, Devon. I've been friends with Meanie for a long, long time and still am. Talk to him daily in a group chat, and Meanie was at my wedding, and gosh, everybody. I treated it the same way I treated high school, where I just kind of wanted to be friendly and get along and have just cast a wide net. And I've always wanted to have trouble answering that question of who were you comfortable with, who did you spend time with, who did you travel with, who did you room with. I always wanted to have trouble answering that question because I wanted it to be such a diverse kind of, just a lot of people. And I think that's the best answer, is that I had a lot of really good friends that I got along with there.
So Dudley Boys obviously being one of the greats of all time when it comes to tag team wrestling. They recently retired. Where do you put the Dudley Boys? In the history of tag team wrestling, where do you personally put them?
At the top, in the top, right, in the top five, in the top three. I mean, at the top. It depends how you measure. It depends what you're looking for. It depends what you like. It depends when you got into watching wrestling. It depends what all you've watched. It depends what your preferences are. Um, I think for guys from the New York scene, for guys that went through the indies, which you could say that about anybody. Everybody starts at a school, works the indies, that kind of thing. Well, I mean, I guess not everybody, but for the most part. But for I think the Dudleys have gone far above and beyond accomplishing exactly what they hoped for, looked at one way, or everything they could ever possibly imagine in their wildest dreams. Somewhere in between those two things, depending on, where they were coming from. Whether, I think Bubba, he's so driven. Not that Devon isn't, but, I don't. Both of them really, I think, just knew they had confidence in themselves. They they it's not just a case of not wanting to fail, but it's almost knowing that you're not going to fail, especially once you do get a break. Once you do get a break and crack into a certain echelon, um, I don't know, man. I think the Dudleys are really a great team that were able to make a lasting impact and leave a tremendous legacy in the wrestling business.
Yeah, without a doubt. And rewinding back to 1995, ECW was still kind of low key in the grand scheme of things. When do you think that single moment, was there a single moment where ECW was officially put on the map, in your opinion?
Barely Legal was big. Um, TNN, I wouldn't want to give credit for being that, because TNN, I think, hurt the company just as much as it helped it, if not more so. Um, it was just a movement. It was just a revolution that, honestly, like, if it wasn't Barely Legal, I think it just had to be a snowball effect, and it just had to be this kind of rolling, pre-boiling water that all of a sudden just takes enough steam that it just is at a constant boil. It's just, we just kept, I think, getting men on base and hitting singles until we finally had the bases loaded and every single brought in a run. Like, that was just us. We just, it was a movement.
ECW was so influential on many levels, but bringing hardcore wrestling to the mainstream. Of course, before ECW, there were plenty of hardcore individuals, the Sheep Herders, the original Sheik, and the list goes on. But as far as bringing it to mainstream, ECW really put it on the map, and then the edgier content that eventually kind of guided the WWF into the Attitude Era. I think it's safe to say. So they certainly have been extreme. Well, no pun intended, but extremely influential in the wrestling business for sure. And I remember early on, I think it was 1997. I want to say you had the involvement of ECW a few times on Monday Night Raw, which was at that time kind of unheard of to see another promotion getting involved. Obviously, there was a little bit of a working relationship there leading into that. But what are your memories of that time period specifically? Of the ECW crew mixing it up with the WWF. What was the internal talk amongst the boys? How were they feeling about how that process was unfolding?
Well, I think it's a good pull that you bring it up because I think maybe that's another time that we were put on the map, right? Stuff like the invasion, kind of, or whatever you want to call it, with WWF. Stuff like Jerry Lawler coming and working ECW Arena. Guys like Lawler and Jake the Snake Roberts working our pay per views. These are all things that help put us on the map. Um, at the time, man, I was kind of in the dark. I was kind of um I don't know. I feel sometimes that because I was the baby in the locker room, and I feel that sometimes, I definitely wasn't office. I definitely wasn't like considered part of the New York crew, like Dreamer and Taz and Bubba and guys that got the benefit of like riding with Paul, and so he would kind of pitch ideas, brainstorm with them, that kind of thing. Um, I don't, I mean, not that I was kept in the dark, but it was kind of, I think I was one of maybe a few or a lot or some people that it was kind of just left up to us to figure out what was going on. I think for a lot of the boys, it was kind of either, on a need to know basis, or I don't know. It was big for the company, big for the wrestling business, good content, good product, very interesting, very breaking down the fourth wall, very edgy, very the kind of thing that gets people talking at the water cooler or at the coffee in the break room, because it's like, how much of this is real, how much of this is fake, even if it is all, convoluted and kind of, machinated and predetermined and everybody's working together. Why are they? Is WWF partnering up with ECW so that they get a leg up on WCW? That gets people talking about the big war. So it was fun and it was meaningful. It wasn't just kind of like a throwaway angle. And there's a lot of thought that goes into that. That's a big angle. I mean, you could do it as a hot shot. You could just do it as the first thing you think of, and then you're like, why not do it? But there's really a lot more that has to get put into it than that, I think, because it's the kind of thing that really is going to shake the landscape. And then, we had such a halo effect, we had such brand loyalty, that it's like, oh, what if we're not extreme anymore? Because people think we're in bed with WWF, which we've been saying we're our worst enemies for all the, it's just everything's going to have pros and cons, and everything's going to be kind of, a measured decision. And, I just think it was super interesting.
Yeah. And was it just Paul Heyman, or was there somebody else that was very influential in bringing in the other styles of wrestling, like you mentioned, the Lucha Stars at one point, or bringing in the Eddies and the Malenkos and the Jerichos? Who was kind of the main focus on bringing that talent in?
I'm thinking Paul.
Okay.
Thinking Paul. I'm thinking Paul had his finger on the pulse of the public, and he was reading newsletters himself, and he was watching tapes himself. And I mean, but with suggestion maybe from Dreamer and um, maybe Scotty Raven. Um, but I think Paul.
And you mentioned you pretty much got along with just about everybody. Was it a tight knit crew? Was everybody in this together? It was a solid locker room.
It was. It was a very and by the way, going back to the question, I just thought about it. Going back to the question, to be fair, if you want to talk about people who were following the business, reading the newsletters, watching tapes, um, a lot of suggestion might have been made, I'm guessing, to Paul from Gabe Sapolsky. I would be very surprised if Gabe Sapolsky didn't, a time or two go up to Paul Heyman and be like, I just saw this guy last week on a tape. I'll lend you the tape. You should look at this guy. This guy would probably be good. So I wouldn't be surprised if Gabe Sapolsky was getting his booking feet wet back in the 90s, making suggestions to Paul. Um, and then your question after that was, what kind of vibe was it? Was it like, what kind of atmosphere was the locker room?
Yeah. Yeah, you
Yeah,
said it was pretty much a tight knit crew.
it was. It was. We were all family, and if there was ever, something going on, like a brawl or like an outsider or whatever the case may be, everybody stood up and looked out for each other. Um, yeah, it was very much a family. I mean, we were all. It was so ragtag, man. It was so like, it's a lot of people that had never been anywhere before ECW. It's a lot of veterans that have nowhere to go except ECW. It's guys, it's big stars like Austin and a bunch of guys that like Rick Rude, a lot of guys that like would rather be in ECW making good money being a big fish than be in WWF or WCW for how corporate it was, for the politics. They didn't like the locker room vibe there. So it was, but at the end of the day, it's all a bunch of like, it's the little engine that could, you know? It's still the
Yeah.
island of toys. So, yeah, really, really supportive, tight knit community.
And any personal memories of Fonzie, Bill Alfonso over the years?
Yeah, Fonzie's great. Fonzie guided me. Fonzie took care of me. Just he's a great guy. We're still friends to this day. He's another one that I could throw on the list of who I talk to pretty often. Um, Fonzie's just a super guy, big heart. Just loves people, loves wrestling. Um, yeah, I have nothing but great things to say about Fonzie.
And how about memories of the late great Sabu?
It's, a smart, wild man. Just like a genius lunatic, like a pioneer, a revolutionary, a cowboy, a real person, somebody who said what they meant what they said. Um, one of the last of his kind, you know, um, an old schoolish guy, a territory guy, and an asset to the company.
Now, while you're with ECW, are you solely focused on that product, or are you watching some of the WWF, some of the WCW, just to kind of see what else is going on?
Yeah, watching everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was your take on that whole, Monday Night War at the time?
Um, it was interesting. Once they went to two shows each instead of one, I worried that it would get oversaturated. Um, I thought it was great for the business. Ratings were through the roof. You couldn't walk out of your house without seeing somebody wearing an Austin shirt, a Goldberg shirt, or an NWO shirt. Um, Gosh, I mean, millions upon millions of, at a time when I think the population was only 280 million or 300 million, you had millions upon millions of people watching wrestling on Monday night. Um, I loved it. From the moment it started, from I guess seeing Luger at Nitro and like I thought the whole thing, and then to be involved in it as, I guess, what Paul Heyman referred to us as was Snapple. He said in the Cola Wars, there's Coke and there's Pepsi, and then we're happy to be number three. We're happy to be the alternative and be Snapple. And So being a part of it, even at that level, was a blast. But yeah, the Monday Night Wars, yeah, huge.
What are your memories of the late great, the legendary Terry Funk, and how influential was he in helping put ECW kind of to the next level, working on the pay per views and that sort of thing?
Yeah, Terry was really influential. He was like a father figure. He was a father figure to Tommy, who was kind of the heart and soul of the company. Um, Terry was just, here's the guy that's done TV and movies, and he's been in WWF and WCW, and he's been a world champion, and he's, got a family name, and he loved Philly wrestling, man. He always just, I think, loved the fact that up in the Northeast, the buttoned up Northeast, there was this hardcore element. He just Philly wrestling is just a culture, man. And he loved it. He loved being an indie guy. He loved being an indie god, an indie king. He loved being a hardcore legend. I think he would have rather been all that than been like 1986 WWF Terry Funk, that they were trying to probably make as much of a cartoon character as they could. Um, he just he loved it, and it showed. And he I can I mean, he helped the company so tremendously. Just give it even more passion, and just give it wrestling gravitas. And I think ECW wouldn't be what it was, wouldn't have gotten to the level that it did without Terry Funk.
And it wasn't extravagant to look at, but such a rich history. Why don't you tell us about the ECW arena, some of your personal, fondest memories from that facility, and what that arena kind of means for the business and those that have worked there.
Yeah, it was nothing about I mean, there were aspects of the building. There was the Eagle's Nest, and like there were some things about the building itself that were special, but bleachers, whatever. I mean, it had a vibe, but it was really about the fans. It was really about the community. It was really about the vibe, the feeling, the aura. There was mystery and suspense and intensity in the air every Saturday at 8 o'clock, or I guess more like 8:45, because we wouldn't start the show until people started chanting "Start the show." But
Right.
it was that building was just. It's nicer now. They've made renovations. They've expanded upon it. And now it's the. I mean, gosh, you could have your wedding there. You could have a corporate event there. I think the Philadelphia Eagles had like a Super Bowl victory party there. Like, there's a ton of stuff that goes there now. But back then, it was just there was Foreman Mills right next door, which was kind of like this dollar store, like this Five Below, and you could get like cookie sheets that you want people to hit each other with, or it was just the arena was it was a moment in time, and it was lightning in a bottle, and it was just it was the right place for the right product, for the right content. It was exactly it was a black box, man. It was at the time, excuse me, it was like a warehouse, and it was nothing else but it was like tofu. It took the flavor of whatever surrounded it. So when
Right.
ECW was there, it literally wasn't Viking Hall or the Double Deuce Bingo Hall anymore. It was ECW Arena, because we Bob Rossed it up with ECW, and ECW is exactly what it felt like.
What was the inspiration for your outfits, your costumes, and your look itself, and how did that come to be?
Um, Gosh, it was kind of part by part. It was a work in progress, and it was kind of life imitating art. And there was one time it was so hot in the room, we were at like Body Slams Arena in Reading, PA, which is like a silo, and in the summertime. maybe with no air conditioning. And I just, kind of like Chris Farley esque, like Chris Farley doing like the Chippendale skit with Patrick Swayze. For heat, I kind of asked, I wasn't so heavy yet, but I was getting there. And it would still have been completely ridiculous to do, a jacket with no shirt. And I asked Todd, I think, if I could do that, if I could not wear the white dress shirt and just wear a black jacket, over my bare chest. And he was like, yeah, go for it. So that's how the shirt got lost. And then when I took total elimination from the eliminators at Barely Legal, um, I wound up in a neck brace. And of course, the quintessential stud muffin, if he has to be in a neck brace, still has to look snazzy and classy. So he's going to put the bow tie as colorful and wild as it can be over a neck brace. And that's pretty much where it came from.
And if you had to pick four, who would the Mount Rushmore of ECW specifically be?
Paul, if I can put Paul on it, right? If he could be first, Paul.
Absolutely.
Uh, tough one. Tommy. Now you have to choose between guys like Taz, Raven, Sandman, New Jack, Sabu, Van Dam. I don't think it gets so obvious after one and two. I think everybody. I mean, do you know? Not to say everybody, but for me, I think a Mount Rushmore has to include Paul and Dreamer, and then for the other two spots, can include any two of about five or six other guys.
And obviously, you were familiar with all the different territories and the tape trading and the magazines and that sort of thing. So, knowledge fan when it comes to pro wrestling in general. Where would you put? It's kind of a typical question, but your Mount Rushmore for all of pro wrestling, any era. Who would you kind of put there? And obviously, there's different ways to look at that. Who was the most successful, but I guess the way to look at it today is, your personal favorites.
Gosh, my personal favorite's going to be a Mount Rushmore that you never heard of before. I mean, you've heard of the guys, but it's going to be a permutation that nobody's ever. I mean, if we're going by my personal favorites, I mean, you're talking about Jake Roberts is going to be on there. You're talking about Austin Idol is going to be on there. Savage is one of my favorites. Andre is one of my favorites. Um, a lot of people put Flair in for his work and just kind of as an all around and like. But the thing is, up in the Northeast, at given times, culturally, mainstream wise, so many more people knew about Randy Savage than knew about Flair. And Savage could also go. He had that match with Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. Selfishly, as somebody who always advocates for Savage, I think I would put Savage in my Mount Rushmore. Um, it's tricky, it becomes kind of like you telling people who or what they should like. And it's so objective, preferences are so personal. But that's kind of, there were guys that I liked because they were different and they got me into wrestling because I saw that wrestling was different from anything else on TV, like freakazoid guys like Kamala, Missing Link, George Steele. There were all the heel talkers like Piper, Ventura, all the managers, all the ring announcers. I still like Roberts. I still like Idol. I still like Savage. I'm gonna have to tap out there. It's real tough to put together a Mount Rushmore.
What's your take on the lost art of the manager? I mean, they are still around here and there today, of course, but they were just so vibrant and full of life, larger than life per se, throughout the '80s and the '90s. And I feel like we've kind of lost that within the industry. What's your take on that?
It's true, and I grew up watching the WWF in the mid '80s here in New York, and that was a manager's territory, and maybe even more so before I started watching in the early '80s. It was a manager's territory. There were, the three wise men of the Northeast. There were countless managers that came through, but really there was Blassie, there was Albano, there was the Grand Wizard. Um, a lot of guys, and they put a lot of different guys with those guys. Um, More often than not, whoever was challenging Backlund had a manager. Um, the lost art of the manager. Yeah, I mean, managers, I think, are part of what makes wrestling interesting, right? I think a manager in wrestling, as far as the product and the end result and the presentation, I think a manager goes a lot farther than, let's say, somebody's coach in boxing. You know, no disrespect to Lou Duva, boxing coach. No disrespect to any other boxing coach. Anybody that worked with Tyson, anybody that worked with Julio Cesar Chavez, anybody that's worked with Floyd Mayweather. But presentation wise, that's kind of behind the scenes and in the corner in between rounds. And it's kind of not focused on as much. But when there's a wrestling manager, you get to actually run spots through them. You get to actually have storyline and angle through them. They're pivotal as far as the program goes. They have a whole level of, they've got a dynamic with the guy they're managing. They've got a dynamic with the guy that they're working against. There's a lot more psychology that can be employed when you have a manager involved. And I think there did come a certain time where what they wanted out of a manager changed. And then it seemed like the industry focused away from it and kind of almost got rid of the role in general. And I don't know if that's because they figure if they're going to pay millions of dollars to top guys, that they want those guys to be able to talk for themselves. Like, I don't know. But yeah, I loved managers growing up. That's always what I aspired to. That's always who I wanted to be. At that convention in '91, I loved meeting Johnny Valiant, and meeting Woman, and meeting Jim Cornette. At the UWF one, I met John Tolos, and it was, that was a lot of what I loved about wrestling.
So when did the catchphrase "well, well, well" start? And you were able to kind of obviously tweak it every single night, every arena, and make it different and feel new each and every time, while kind of you know keeping it familiar. How did that come about?
Well, 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 I think comes from Paul. It sounds kind of a little bit cartoony, and Paul loved cartoons for psychology. He loved like Warner Brothers, Bugs Bunny, that kind of thing. And well, well, well is just like ECW. This is war. You know what I mean? This is war is always kind of like I think a Bugs Bunnyism. There were little splashes of it throughout, and I think well, well, well is just kind of such an epitome of what people heels on television and in the movies say to start off any given clause or paragraph or monologue or whatever, because you've got to be a real asshole to just take the effort and the time to not just say what you feel and mean what you say, but to start off whatever you're going to say with the preface, and especially if it's drawn out like, whoa, whoa, what, like only an idiot, like you have to be super into yourself and all that kind of thing. So I think psychologically it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, definitely. I think the rhymes, the sexual innuendo, the limericks, 98% of the time, me. but well itself, Paul, and quintessential stud muffin itself, Paul, which I've always believed is an homage to Austin Idol, which is crazy because, he's one of my favorites. But Paul managed Idol early in his career, and Idol was the universal heartthrob. And I think that's why I was the quintessential stud muffin.
Now, if you had to pinpoint it to one particular moment, what would you say is your fondest memory, personal memory of ECW?
Wow. Pay per view is big. Um, Pay per view was a fun moment where we all felt accomplished. Um, I loved going to buildings that I had seen on TV that the WWF or WCW had been in. I loved going to the Mid Hudson Civic Center, seeing on the marquee ECW wrestling Kenny Rogers. I thought that was a huge deal because Kenny Rogers was super over when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Um, Cobb County Civic Center, all the TV buildings of theirs that we eventually ran, Hara Arena in Dayton, UNO Lakefront Arena in New Orleans. We had unbelievable TV in New Orleans. I think between two different stations with replays, we were on 5 hours a week. The moment my feet touched down in Bourbon Street for the very first time, I was getting recognized. Um, so working new buildings like that I had only ever seen on TV wrestling, that was big for me personally. Biggest moment, gosh, if not the pay per view. Um, I was in TV Guide, the online version, tvguideonline.com. They gave my JFK Jr. promo a jeer in the Cheers and Jeers feature. So being in TV Guide was big. Um, Gosh, when we got action figures, that was big. TNN was cool because then we were in the TV. I think I can't remember if when we were on MSG, since we were paid programming, I can't remember if it said we were ECW wrestling or not. It may have. In some markets, it may not have. You kind of had to know maybe. Um,
Yeah.
but with TNN, I mean, ECW wrestling on TNN, and we were on there for a year. That was big. But again, that was bittersweet because that was kind of, from the top of the hill kind of on down. Um, just getting the job, like we were talking about before, the day where Paul told me that, I could go ahead and have a tryout at the Middletown show, being at that show and getting my first ECW payday from Ed Zahn, that was big. Um, Doing lucha intros with same with Mount Rushmore. I think, Joe, like me, we'd be here all day. I don't know. So I mean, it was the best times of my life.
So many big moments to choose from, that's for sure. Personal memories of Chris Candido.
What a great guy. What a great guy. Um, Taken decades and decades too soon. Uh, what an amazing, just a really good guy, helpful. He's another one, if you want to know somebody that kind of made suggestions and could have been in Paul's ear and been part of like that inside crew. Chris was
Yeah.
very well respected for his opinions and for his knowledge. Um, just super friendly, super helpful, loved the business. Um, just a good loyal friend and just a really salt of the earth guy. Their wrestling business could do a whole lot worse than to have 300 more Chris Candidos in it. because he was just a really, really good egg.
And who within the company was in charge of the merchandising and making sure that coming up with the concepts for the T-shirts and things like that, and making sure that they're getting sent out to the fans properly when it was kind of its infant state, I guess.
Sent out to the fans was like the Westchester office, so like guys like Guido and Devon. That's who kind of did the admin. As far as the designs and the concept and actually getting stuff printed and like manufacturing or producing the merch, that was Taz. Um, Paul came up with a lot of the ideas and concepts for the t-shirts. Uh, yeah,
When it came to the action figure line that came out, and obviously appearing in the video games and merchandise as well, were there did the talent see a piece of the pie like they would in WWF? Was it the same scenario?
it depends what kind of deal you signed. I to get a really good deal, and as close as possible to something an employee might have, to get guaranteed money, I signed a full rights buyout. So I didn't get a piece of video games. There was no action figure for me at the time. Um, yeah, I didn't get anything on the merchandise end. I just got my weekly slash annual guarantee. But some people, I'm sure, maybe did. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think it was case by case.
And you mentioned you eventually joined Joey Styles and Color. What are your memories of Joey Styles and he kind of being the one man show for commentary for so long?
Yeah. Yeah, Joey was a machine, man. Joey was great. Joey knew what his role was. He knew that he needed to be as straight laced as possible because you know how if you've got Andre the Giant working, you're going to put him in with the shortest referee possible so that there's the largest disparity and he looks big.
Sure.
What Joey was, I mean, in real life, like Joey could, Joey was, he was cool, he was friendly, he was, Joey, he wasn't exactly what he was on TV, but on TV, not that he needed to be um he didn't need to be geeky or nerdy, he didn't need to be like corporate or ritzy. It was in his own way, he just as a journalist or whatever, he just needed to be a straight man and as straight laced as possible. And I think so in doing that, he became like the one bit of order amongst chaos, you know, like the
Yeah.
Dudley whole company, music driven. This one comes out to Man in the Box. Who comes out to Metallica? Who comes out to Kiss? Dudley's come out to nothing. 10 seconds of silence, and then, well, and booze. So we were the outsiders. We didn't have music. We did things differently. And Joey did things differently because all of the boys from Terry Funk to Sal Balomo to everything that comes down the pike, everybody's crap house loony. And then here's Joey just kind of guiding you through. And I loved him for that, and I loved him for calling stuff all by himself. To where instead of with a color guy with an analyst, he was play by play color and analysis. He wore three hats. A lot of the companies now have a 3-man booth. Some of them have a 5-man, 4-man booth. Joey was doing it all himself, and I think there's merit in that.
Absolutely. Now, what was the call time arriving to the arenas for house shows and for television? Did it differ?
I'm trying to remember. I don't even know if we had an official one. It was just whatever made sense, right? I mean, I guess if you show up too late, you're going to get in trouble. I think it was really kind of it was a little bit looser than us having a call time. I think for an 8 o'clock show, there was probably an unwritten call time of 6 o'clock, maybe, but it wasn't the kind of thing like for like I know WWE TV. I think a lot of the times there's like a 12 noon call. We didn't have anything like that to where it was like an 8 hour shift or to where like if you had that date on the calendar you were there all day and it was the only thing you were doing. A lot of the boys used to go out and sightsee or whatever during the day, have a big lunch or whatever and just kind of have a few hours, maybe stay in the hotel. Saturday shows, I think a lot of the boys were watching college football. Tracy Smothers was probably in the room until 5, 6 o'clock watching college football. So it was kind of loose. Yeah,
Any memories of Sign Guy Dudley and Big Dick Dudley? Personal memories over the years?
yeah, yeah. Me and Sign Guy had a lot of fun. We never saw a bad waitress that we didn't rib. Uh, Gosh, what did we do? The things we did. It would be a shorter list what we didn't do. There was one waitress, I guess, who didn't know that we had showed up at our wrestling show at, like I say, 5 or 6 o'clock call time, and now it's 5 in the morning because everybody had to do promos, and the Dudleys did promos last in pitch black, in Dudleyville, which is outside the arena. And so now we've been at work like 11, 12 hours, and some of us have been bumping around wrestling, and we're away from our families. And I guess waitresses, you catch a bad one, and they're only thinking about what's wrong in their life on that given day at that moment. And they're, when you're a performer, you can't not be on. And then there would be waitresses that came to our table and they just were not on. And me and Sang Guy would kind of look at each other. One time, I was like, waitress had given us a ton of attitude, and now she's taking everybody's order or whatever. And she looks at me and what do you have? And I told her, and she's like, what do you have to drink? And I had looked at the menu already, and I said, "You have Mountain Dew? No. You have Fresca? No. You have Welch's Grape? No. You have Mr. Pibb? No." I went 10 deep,
Oh,
and then I said, "Do you have iced tea?" And I could almost see her wiping her brow mentally, like without using her hand. I could almost see her like thanking God that it was over. And she's like, "Yes, we have iced tea." I was like, "Great, I'll have a water."
oh, that's great.
So I remember Sign Guy popping for that. Um, Big Dick, man, what a great guy. I don't know why he liked me as much as he did, but I'm so thankful. Um, he would always tell me not to tell him in advance what my limerick was going to be because he wanted to hear it for the first time out there. And then sometimes it would make him laugh, and he would have to throw his long hair over into his face so that people couldn't see him laughing. Um, God, and I took that moonsault, and it was like a pillow. It was so good. Um, he was a character, man. He was old school. He was he had a presence, man. You knew when Alex was in the room, but even though he had that going for him, he was a teddy bear. He never used it against people. That he was such an imposing and kind of he was a real good dude, real good dude.
Yeah. How do you think ECW got away with, playing a lot of those entrance songs that are, copyrighted to different groups or, different bands?
Zero idea.
Yeah,
I I think we almost did it under the guise of, oh, well, they'll be happy to get the promotion. I don't know. Or, we haven't been called out for it yet. Let's keep doing it until the wheels fall off.
sure.
I really don't know. I don't think we had an under the table. I mean, especially like now you hear about like not now, but back in the day, you hear about Metallica with Napster,
Right.
and you yourself like we played Metallica multiple times a week in the arena, and we're playing it on TV, and like so they don't want they're getting on individuals for downloading stuff on Napster, but like we're playing it to like hundreds of I don't know, I don't know how we did it, Joe. I don't
Yeah.
we just did it.
No, it was meant to be, and it worked out. You know, some of those songs were just so iconic, and people hear that song and they'll place that now with a certain individual from ECW. So, you know, just part of the magic that is ECW. That is for sure. At one point, you went on to TNA, made a couple of appearances there. What was your experience like there?
It was interesting because for me it was a lot more structured. It was a lot it had a different feel. um there was a different level of administration and organization and production and just different. We barely had lights. We had, just our sound system for music. We had no pyro. It was just we had no video wall. Now you go to 2300 arena, and every promotion you can see who's there that night because they've got their video wall, this, that, whatever. Like I don't even there was a time we didn't even have ECW on the apron or in the middle of the ring. Like we were really kind of black box. Like
Yeah,
we were really kind of generic, shoestring, fundamental, back to basics territory pro wrestling. And TNA wasn't that. TNA wanted to compete, and they had money. So it was different from the booking end of things. It was, Jerry Jarrett was their booking, which I loved. That's part of the draw. That's what I was so happy to be involved because he was. Um, so I was still there when Jerry Jarrett was booking at the beginning. So I just felt blessed to be tapped and to be chosen, and I don't know. I guess that's the short answer is that TNA was a lot more, I think the best word is structured.
yeah. And it's funny, the most pro ECW audience was probably, you know, if you could pick one night, was probably at a WWE pay per view, and that would be ECW One Night Stand. And the fans were just so behind all of you, and it was awesome to watch. It was just crazy as it unfolded to see that happening. What was your personal experience like working on that show and getting all those extra eyes on you and working with the WWE talents? What was that like? And kind of take us through the day leading up to the pay per view. Any experience backstage or anything?
So I had seen Monday Night Raws at the Hammerstein Ballroom at the Manhattan Center um, before as a fan. Um, so getting paid to be which, we were talking about Cobb County and Hara Arena and UNO Lakefront. So it falls into that category. But when it's specifically a WWE production and the wrestling that you cut your teeth on was WWF. It was just it was it was a highlight. It was in ECW doing the video games and everything and all of the other moments that we talked about when you asked like when did you know that you'd made it or what was the moment that sticks out. I think for me personally, for my career, I knew that I had made it and that I had a recognizable name and act when I was asked to work on that show and when I worked for them in that building. I think that's when I knew. Um, so my I was staying with my folks that weekend, and I think I was living in Brooklyn at the time anyway. So to say staying with my folks is ridiculous because it's all New York City and New York City. It's not like I was in from out of town. It's not like I took a plane. That's one of the, I didn't have to fly in for that show. I didn't have any kind of travel really whatsoever, just like a cab ride or a train or whatever. But I was staying with my folks who lived in the city in Manhattan, um, right around the pay-per-view, before and after. So my commute to the building for that show and my commute home was like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So imagine you're in the place in the world where you feel the most that you are happy that you belong. And you're in this and you're working for WWE for once, and you're working for WWE for the first time. And you're there from noon until midnight. At midnight, you get in a cab. By 12:15, you're already home and you're on your parents' couch and you're trying to wind down and take it all in and process it when just 15 minutes ago you were still at the building and the pay-per-view had pretty much just ended. And it's just this kind of real, I don't know, I mean, for people who know how it feels to have like dopamine in your system from achieving success, getting a win, being victorious, having a great moment, it's that day was just amazing. I mean, I don't know. There's there's no other way to describe it. I mean, but it was surreal. Like, just having such a short commute home. It was like I can't, like, not going to a hotel, not going to a bar or a club to blow off steam, not hanging out with the boys, not like it just having, because when WWE rents a building, it becomes like Disney World. It becomes like surrounded, like engrossed. It's just it's almost like you're in the same way ECW arena. When it's not there, it could be it's just a warehouse, but when
Right.
it's there, absolutely the hub of ECW and all things ECW it embodies. That's like that Hammerstein Ballroom is when WWE is there. It's just this wrestling, thousands of people screaming, all the boys giving it 120%. It's just this factory. It's a dream factory.
Yeah.
And just to it was just surreal 15 minutes later being home. It was almost like, you don't want to ask yourself, did that really happen? Because you spent all day doing it. It's so fresh and you just did it. It's the weirdest kind. It's indescribable. Words can't, it's just a feeling that words can't, you know, describe.
And you've been a great contributor to different charities and stuff, and a big supporter of St. Jude's Children's Hospital over the years. What's that experience been like?
It's been great. To to see that you're actually making a difference. Every once in a while they send out like a rate card of sorts where they show you like what different amounts actually do. Like for this much money, a child can get a procedure that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get. For this much money, these supplies or medicine, and you total it up and you add it up and you realize that since I've been giving to St. Jude for the last 15 years, because I started doing it in 2010 when Georgianne Macropolis passed, I started giving personally $100 a month every month of the year 2010, and I've been giving, on and off. Some years, I before I got these auctions going, I probably wasn't giving regularly. Now it's more like 4 or 5 thousand a year. Uh, I know I'm over 10,000 lifetime. They're great. They piggyback my stuff on social media. They react to it. They're very appreciative. I've gotten handwritten notes. I've gotten T-shirts. That's not why you do it, but I mean, if we're talking about it in depth, um, I'll never know why I do it because I don't know that I'll ever meet any of the kids that it helps. Um, I just they've got a stockpile of money that I want to do my personal best to make sure I am giving my it's funny. I hate to pay taxes, right? Especially as much as they are. Like I hate to be told to give, especially when I know so much of it's going to get wasted and so much of it is unnecessary, right? Like I hate to overpay for something. I hate to pay too much in taxes, but then on the other side of the coin, I love nothing more than to orchestrate the donation of $4 or $5,000 a year to St. Jude because it's just this much from this person, this much from that person, a few $100 here, $10 here, and it makes such a big difference. I mean, we're just such a small. I call it a nonprofit, but it's in the grand scheme of things, relatively, it's kind of small, even at $5,000 a year. But it's just me and my wife running it. So it's a lot better than the average like $19 a month that they're looking for from households.
Yeah.
It's closer to $400 a month. And from us, that's what we can do right now. And that's an honor and a blessing for me to be able to give back, you know.
And what advice do you have to somebody that's looking to just get into the wrestling business? They're starting from scratch.
Make sure it's for you. Make sure you're a wrestling person. Do it because you love it or at least like it very much. Do it because it's one of those things that if you're not actually working, if you're doing the kind of thing that you would do for free or pay to do, you'll never work a day in your life. Um, have that mindset. Don't do it as the cleanest dirty shirt. Don't do it as a cash grab. Um, it might wind up fiscally beneficial to you, at least for a time, maybe for the duration. But I don't think it would be. I don't think someone would be living their best life if they weren't tuned in to enjoying the ride. It's a long road. It's bumpy. It's in every way. It's the say, oh, I wish I could give up my 9 to 5. Yeah, well, when you give up your 9 to 5, you're trading it for a 24/7. You know.
Right.
The other day, I heard. I think I can't remember which country music singer. I heard somebody say something that resonated with me. It was like, if you figure it out and you have success and things are working out for you, the road is long and bumpy. If you don't figure it out and you go down the wrong path and all the wrong things are happening, it's a dead end. You have to want to ride that long, bumpy road. Otherwise, it's probably not worth the trade off
Yeah.
unless you're one of the top 100 people in the industry or top 50 people in the industry. And it's very, very hard to get that spot. Um, right? I mean, you've got in this world, I would imagine you have at least hundreds of thousands of people wishing that they could be one of the top 50. So it's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah,
But,
exactly.
but if you feel that you can do it, and if you feel that it's worth the try, if the juice is worth the squeeze, then I encourage you. Uh, but if it's not, figure out why, and if the juice is worth the squeeze, change it, or maybe think about doing something else.
And you yourself, post ECW, got involved in promoting MXW Pro Wrestling. Why don't you tell us about that venture?
Yeah, MXW was fun. There was one fan came up to me one time at a show. He's like, "You're like the PWG of the East." It was really starting to take hold. But we had no money. I mean, it was just me, and there was no sponsorship. There was no corporate affiliation. There was no. It was just it was me. It was like Jim Cornette doing Smoky Mountain, but that was bigger. It was like Paul doing ECW, but that was bigger. It was it was me as an indie promoter, and it was um the time was right creatively. My creative juices were flowing. The time could have been a lot better fiscally. Um, I think in a different world, MXW is as popular and as good as NXT. I think NXT, when there was no more MXW anymore, I think NXT being able to, just watching the product, I think it kind of fills a void. Um, it's not exactly the same, but you've got young talent. You've got it's got an experimental vibe. It's got a developmental vibe. And there was some stuff that, gosh, I mean, we opened up the Washington Avenue Armory in Albany, New York, which had been a WWF building, a Vince Senior building. Then, when WWF and WWE, when they moved on to the bigger buildings in Albany, they left the Armory, kind of behind. And the Armory didn't have wrestling in it for years upon years, from like the early to mid 80s until like we were there in 2005. So, like over 20 years, I think the building had been dark to wrestling. So, we reopened it after we left. Like NXT took it over a few years later. We had one show that we were going to call Next Level, and we were like toggling like the lowercase and the uppercase. The next almost looked like NXT because one of our mottos was, we're not just new school, we're next school. And then all of a sudden, like 5, 10 years later, there's NXT. I even heard Joe Tessitore, a few months ago. He referred to the WWE product, sports entertainment. He referred to it as athletic artistry, which completely threw me against the wall, like really knocked my socks off,
Yeah.
because we were calling MXW athletic artistry exactly in 2005.
Wow.
So, so stuff that gets seen and stuff that gets found, archived, historians look for good ideas. I can't say that. So, I mean, I know that as a promoter, as a content creator, who that's what I was there to do, kind of executive produce for MXW, not in MXW, but earlier on when I was in ECW, I came up with the idea for a wrestler, and it would get talked about and laughed at by the boys, and we would throw it around. Could you imagine if they did this? And then, like 10 years later, WWE does Eugene, and it's exactly what I had come up with 10 years earlier. So, not to pinpoint any one specific thing, that you could know who borrows what and what inspiration came from where, but MXW did a lot of cool stuff that I think and I hope directly or indirectly influenced some influential people in the world of professional wrestling. And if that's the case, then that is my joy and my honor, to be able to give back to a business that gave so much to me.
Wrestling figures are hotter than ever. There are so many different companies involved now in the game. And do you think we'll see a Joel Gertner action figure down the line?
I know we will because now my wife's on it. So now it's not now it's guaranteed to succeed because she doesn't take any prisoners and she doesn't play any games. There's no recess in her school day. Um, I had signed an agreement with three different companies all over the world, international companies, and all three of them have either shut down or discontinued the line that I was going to be in. Or yeah, all three I signed on for, and all three fell apart. So we are. I'm hopeful to a fault because, like I say, I'm certain almost. That this fourth time is the charm. We're working with a company that does entertainment toys in here, and they're based out of New York City, and it's a project now that Squeeze has taken under her wing, my wife, and so yeah, it's there will be one. Yeah,
I look forward to that day. That's going to be good for the fans and for the collectors. You know, that's you can't complete an ECW collection without Joel Gertner. So now, 2023, you were inducted into the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. What are some of your memories from that weekend?
gosh. So Squeeze went behind my back and called all my closest friends in the world, college buddies, Eric Anderson, who's out in California, who has ties to the New England wrestling scene, who I met in Brooklyn because I was managing him as Joey Jaguar at age 16 because he was a teacher at my school while I was a student at my school. So Eric Anderson, who I hadn't seen, I think, since my wedding. So, gosh, Eric and just a bunch of people that have all never been in the same place at the same time, just really kind of a this is your life kind of thing. And I'm just turning around, and every half hour or every hour, I'm being peppered with seeing these super important people in my life and realizing that they came in on a plane for this moment. And so I mean that was, that goes, I mean, that's, I think, the highlight. But I mean, that's the highlight maybe on a personal non-wrestling level. And then, for you to have chosen me, I think maybe before COVID, and then there was the COVID hiatus, and then I actually got inducted a couple of years ago. And um yeah, unbelievable. Just to be inducted with people that you've worked alongside, people that you've watched on TV, admired their work, paid for a ticket to see, just to get honored. I think Mike McGurk and Barry Horowitz and just so many people. It was a career highlight. It was another one of those moments where, how do you know that you've made it? Well, you know that you've made it if you get chosen to go into a Hall of Fame, especially one that's as prolific and as poignant, has as much meaning as the New England one does. So yeah, it touched my heart a lot, and it was a great moment.
Well, it's certainly well deserved. In closing, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be?
I leave it up to people to choose what they thought I brought to the table, what they enjoyed. A lot of people don't even exactly remember the moments. They might be trying to quote one of my quotes, and the wording might be wrong, because I think a lot of the time it's not the moments it's the moments, but it's on an emotional level. Sometimes you don't remember what somebody did exactly in doing it for you, but you remember how you felt, how they did it, the passion. You remember that it happened. You remember how much it meant. So, in I would just like to be remembered fondly and vividly. And if I could be remembered in general, but as fondly and as passionately as possible, then it would be far be it from me to tell people, oh, you should remember. Now, if you enjoyed my work, if you liked me as a person, I would want to be organically remembered. However, somebody would give me the blessing and honor of remembering me.
For Joel Gertner, I'm Joseph Bruen. It's the All Access Entertainment Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the page and you'll get the notifications for upcoming videos. Joel, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, dude.